And everybody said we were going to have infrastructure week. Every president's tried it. President Biden did it. Put his money where his mouth is. We're going to make this happen. There's no important part of this bill than clean air, clean water. $60 billion on top of all to make sure that plants are not spewing toxic chemicals for the people that live next to them that are poisoning our children's minds. To actually, if you can imagine, in America, right now in Lowndes County that he's going to talk about, where people have, that's true everywhere across the country. Same thing with the brownfields and the Superfund sites. The president wants to clean all that stuff up. We got massive investments. Stephen, you ought to know this because you helped start to make this happen. Lake Pontchartrain is miles wide. Cleaning up the Everglades, cleaning up the Great Lakes. This is Roosevelt-sized money the environment. And this president is as aggressive and as committed to it and is not turning around, notwithstanding what that crazy Supreme Court just did. And unless y'all don't know this, from the time y'all bought the ticket to come to Essence till today, it's changed. And I'm just saying to pay attention to it and just remind y'all, not that y'all need reminding, but if you're from the South, you're not seeing anything that we have not seen before. This is just a replay. And essentially 5 members of states' right, plural states' right, the people on the state level decide what your constitutional rights are. And they took the constitutional guardrails out and basically have started taking back. It has never happened in the history of this country. Whether it's reproductive rights, that decision sounds like the way it was written by a caveman, take you back. And I don't know about you guys, but nobody's gone back there. If that wasn't enough, then they started working before on redistricting and reapportionment. And then all of a sudden now with EPA, they want to return states the opportunity about whether you can have clean air, clean water. Well, I got bad news for you. State legislators are they? What do they look like? What do they think like? What are the rules that they're going to do to regulate? So some people, you know, depending on what rights you have, it's a lottery on where you were born. That's what we have going on in the country right now. And this president is going to stand, make sure that this country goes forward and not backwards. And that's what this young man, leave you because I got to go catch a plane. But on behalf of this president of the United States, who told you that diversity was a strength, not a weakness, was the result of you seeing the first African sworn in yesterday as the first African-American Supreme Court justice in the history of the country. And then tomorrow, that's right, amen on that. And tomorrow, the vice president of the United States is, you know who she is. And then today, he and I were running around with Shalonda Young, who is the head of the Office of Management and Budget. Let me explain this to you real quick. Management, she tells everybody what to do. Budget, she got money. She's the boss of running the whole federal government. Absolutely. And she's from New Orleans. She's from Baton Rouge. You heard me if I was from New Orleans, but she's from the Baton Rouge area. Susan C. Young, Marsha Fudge, the President of the United States said, I could not have gotten elected without black women in this country. And he said, I will never forget it. He said it straight up, and he means it. And he has put all of some of the most important levers that make this government work. And at the end of the day, this is about the health and safety and welfare. Nobody who's more protected for that here. So help me welcome Administrator Michael Regan for the EPA.
No,
I wasn't supposed to bring him up in 1 second.
But thank you, Mitch Landry. Thank you so much for being here. Let's give another round of applause as he catches his flight. So a little bit of housekeeping. First, we would not be here if it was not for the tremendous generosity and support of our partners. And so I want to recognize our partner organizations who are helping put on this event today. So the Environmental Defense Fund, the Union for Concerned Scientists. Yes, give them a round of applause. NRDC, We Act for Environmental Justice, and the Climate Action Campaign. Please give them a round of applause. And we want you all to connect with those folks who are here today as we continue to work together to make progress on all these amazing issues. So I have the pleasure of bringing up a tremendous individual. She has amazing experience working actually formerly at the EPA as a regional administrator, but is now doing amazing work at the Environmental Defense Fund as the Vice President of Community Engagement. Please join me in welcoming Heather McTeer-Toney.
Thank you. And how does everybody feel today? Are we excited to be back at Essence? I don't know about you, but I am beyond ecstatic to be here with you this evening and to have a very important conversation. The fact that we're actually having this conversation in a place that has not only been devastated by environmental justice and climate issues, but now is on the forefront of that thanks to this administration and to the hard work of the young man that I am about to bring on stage with me now. Administrator Michael Regan is our administrator for the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and how fortunate we are to have someone who not only is from the part of the country that has experienced so much of the environmental devastation on the front lines, but comes with a heart and a mind for people. And I think all of us can agree right now today that more than ever it is so important for us to be aligned on what matters to people and how we're able to come together, collectively understand and co-create these solutions together. Certainly that's what I'm able to do. Without further ado, I'm going to bring up my good friend, Administrator Michael Regan, so we can have a great conversation and talk about this. How you doing? So before we get started on this conversation, I have another ask of everyone. We are at Essence, folks. Okay? This is the opportunity that we have to tell and share with the entire world what matters. So I'm not going to be moved, and I hope you will not be moved, if people take out your phones, that you are tweeting, Instagramming, that you are using all the social media channels. I think yours is it at Michael Regan EPA? I should know this. I have it written. I should too, and I'm supposed to know. At EPA Michael Regan, ladies and gentlemen. I saw our friend Roland Martin here earlier. Thank you. I think he is going to be live streaming, and we want you to do the same, because part of this is about normalizing the conversation of climate and environmental justice, and we do that by talking to our friends and the people who are on our social channels. So please do that. Tag us at EDF. That's where I work, and I want to make sure that we're also tagging all of our partners, and we're normalizing and continuing this conversation along the way. So let's go ahead and just sort of jump in and get started. I want to first say thank you, because one of the first stops that you made on your Journey to Justice tour was right here in Louisiana. You made it a point to come down and to put environmental justice at the forefront of your work. And I know we're both from the South, so we've both lived in that experience, but to see it on the front end and really take to heart what that means to people, thank you for doing that and for centering it. Can you talk about, from that tour, what are the solutions, the things that you heard from people, and how have you been able to really work to enact that and enact it in the policy at EPA?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for your leadership and for having this conversation. We've switched seats. I was at EDF at once upon a time, and now I'm at EPA, so we've swapped seats. The first thing I'll say is that I work for the first president to ever utter the words environmental justice at a State of the Union. This is a centerpiece of the administration, and so that has created a space where folks like us can really push the envelope. The one thing that I've always understood is government doesn't have all the solutions, that the solutions start with the communities. The purpose for the Environmental Justice Tour was to do a couple things. First and foremost, I wanted to see things for myself and to bring the attention to communities that have not gotten attention for any time. Not because I thought EPA had all the solutions, but I knew as a cabinet member, I could show up in towns, cities, places where they don't see the state police provide a caravan for a government employee pulling up in black SUVs, just creating all kinds of attention. The second thing is the media followed me there. Well, when you put that kind of pressure on local communities, the things that I can't get done from EPA, those locally elected officials after the social media, after the MSNBC, after the CNN, they start to be embarrassed and they start to take action. And so after that tour, not only did we ramp up our enforcement and our inspections because we saw things firsthand, a lot of the locally elected officials, because of the coverage, decided to start taking action. But the whole game plan was to bring attention to the issue. And I'll tell you, it's 2022, and I've visited communities where I'm talking with mothers whose children have been lead poisoned. If you are a black child in this country at or below poverty level, you are 4 times more likely to have elevated levels of lead in your blood. This is not coincidence. This is by design. I was in Jackson, Mississippi at an elementary school because I was supposed to talk to 8 and 9-year-olds about water quality. And I pulled up to this school, and all you could see was porta potties for as far as the eye could see, with no construction happening. Those porta potties are what the students were using because they didn't have good water pressure. This is in the middle of a pandemic. These are our children. And so my goal has been to use our voice, our bully pulpit, to bring attention, whether EPA can solve the problem or not. Bring attention to these issues because these issues are very real. Last thing I'll say is I was in Lowndes County, Alabama. 30% of the population in Lowndes County, Alabama has hookworm. 60% of the people in the community don't have good sewage connection. The kids play in the same yards that raw waste is spewing in those yards. This is happening in 2022 because government has failed so many people. So the passion is there, the need is there, and the will is there. And now, thanks to the president's leadership and our RAP, because of that $1.3 trillion that Mitch just mentioned, there's a significant portion of those resources that can go to solve these problems. We just have to make sure that the right people get those resources.
You know, it's amazing to think about the fact that we are sitting in a space where not only are we having to address these issues, but we're also having to correct past harms at the same time. And I think we are all grateful for not only the work that you're doing in that space, but the encouragement that you're giving, and what I'm hearing is the call to action for all of us. That wasn't made easier this past week. That wasn't made easier with the decisions that have come down. And I know that you put out a public statement really stressing the public health aspects and the continued work that we have to do. And just knowing that there's been such a great recognition of the disparate treatment and impacts, as you've described, for minority communities, particularly black and brown communities. Can you talk a bit about how we are going to, or what you could encourage us to do to really encourage local, state, federal policy to come together and put action with what both Mayor Landrieu outlined, what the environmental groups can do? How can we turn that into action in light of the opinions that we've just experienced?
Well, this is one of these situations where you wish you could Monday morning quarterback it. I mean, it's unfortunate that we don't remind ourselves that the power of our voices is something that we have to use. We have to wait for a Roe v. Wade, or we have to wait for the Supreme Court to roll back, our Clean Air Act statutory authorities. So, we have to have a sense of urgency. Congress gave EPA $100 million just to focus on environmental justice grants and air quality monitoring. We're trying to distribute those resources to organizations that have never had a seat at the table. The big national green groups have finally started to mobilize and rally around environmental justice, but we also don't want to overlook those groups that have been on the ground since day one. Collectively, with the big green groups and those organizations, we need to push resources collectively from philanthropy to our budgets to really shore up the infrastructure of those people on the ground. It's nice for me to come into town and talk to people, but I'm not a trusted voice of the community. The trusted voice in the community are the community members themselves. We have to start having more conversations like this one. We have to have more journey to justices. We have to really just get in the room. And the great thing about the Journey to Justice tour was I reached out to the leaders in the communities and said, you design this tour. You tell me where to go. You tell me what time to show up. And that's something different because typically we'd work with our congressional representatives. We'd strategically choose the places that we knew we wouldn't get yelled at. We'd make it look really good. This time around for Journey to Justice, not only were we invited into these communities, these people poured their hearts out and told us these stories. And we were able to capture it and just show America that in 2022, this stuff is happening. And it's become a movement. Everywhere I go now when I travel the country, people say, okay, what's the next leg going to be like? Which states are you going to next? What are you going to do next? I'm just glad that people are paying attention. And we have the resources now to push to these organizations so that they can build some of this stuff from the ground up.
We're going to go and we're going to go to audience questions. So I just want to let the audience know, I hope you're thinking of those burning questions that you may have because the mic may come to you. And as we are thinking about that, I want to switch it up a little bit. I have kids, I know you have kids, and I want them to have jobs. I want them to have good jobs so that they can take care of me and my husband, and we're able to retire peacefully somewhere. So I am really excited about the innovation that's coming in around green technology and infrastructure and EV, energy, renewable energy opportunities. What are you excited about in that space? And I'm assuming you're like me. Eventually you and your wife want to go somewhere and sit down somewhere and have the kids take this over. What excites you about what's coming up in green technology or green energy and innovation?
I think that what's exciting to me is, and I have this conversation with former EPA administrators all the time, this is a new day. This is a different time. So I can talk about technology and the connection to economic development. I can have conversations with the Secretary of Defense about how clean energy is part of the national defense strategy. Technology is everything. And people look at EPA and say, you guys write rules. We don't just write regulations. We write technology standards. We want the private sector to innovate. So I'm really excited because let's take, for example, the Supreme Court decision yesterday. The Supreme Court decided to take up and evaluate a rule that was developed during the Obama administration that was never actually put in place. So it's an artificial evaluation to begin with. Well, they struck down a rule that never took place, but in the meanwhile, the power sector took that rule seriously, and they met the stringency of that rule 11 years prior than it was supposed to be met. Why is that? That's because the market demanded it. That's because people demanded it. It's not because the power sector decided to have a conscience in case the rule became law. It is financially, strategically, technologically available, achievable, and should be done. And so I'm excited because it's the future. Technology is the future.
So basically the power sector went ahead and paid for it in advance and put it into place and are basically saying from what you're hearing, you know what, we're not going to go back and waste that money again because we've already spent it. So how can we keep that moving forward? What do you think the average person needs to know about that? Because you're right. EPA is, for what most people think of as the rule-making agency. How do we help the average American really understand, the average person, family member who's sitting at their kitchen table trying to manage their budget and energy costs? How do we help them understand the power of what EPA has and does and how it can work for them?
I think we have to do a better job of explaining at the most basic level. My job is to provide good quality drinking water, clean air, try to stave off this climate crisis, make sure that our landfills, our brownfields, our Superfund sites are not disproportionately impacting our communities and are cleaned up. This is just about clean air, clean water, climate change. If people take that for granted, it's one thing. But if people understand that the Supreme Court, that members of the Republican Party and others who want to deny science and basic rights are trying to take that away, and they want certain ones of us breathing dirtier air, drinking dirtier water, and they don't care. If people understand that, I think they would begin to rally around and understand the importance of the function of our job. So we want to also be people. I'm a person. I have an 8-year-old son. When I leave the house every single day and kiss him on his forehead, I'm going to work because I want him and all of his friends to have jobs in the future. the president says it best. When we think about climate change and fighting climate change, it's not a sacrifice. This is a time for opportunity. And this country needs to wake up and understand if we don't embrace technology and new business models and really try to combat this crisis, we're going to be behind because countries like China, India, and others will get a head start on it. So this is about being globally competitive, but it's also about, you know, equity and inclusion for not only folks in the United States, but all across the world.
We have time for a question. Do we have a question from an audience member? If you would raise your hand. I believe we have a microphone that can come to you. If you would tell us your name and where you're from and your question.
Certainly. Administrator Regan, it's such a pleasure to see you. I am Patrice Willoughby, a Vice President of Policy and Legislative Affairs at the NAACP. And one of the issues with electrification and with all of the funds that are in the federal pipeline is how we connect those funding streams to communities of color. And particularly, we know that electrical contractors and others who are black also tend to employ others who are black. And so it seems that it might be time for an equity commitment in terms of working with the unions to ensure that all of the entities that are building out that infrastructure have a commitment to hiring black electrical contractors and other contractors to ensure that those dollars are dispersed fairly. So I'd love your feedback on that.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think that's the premise of the White House's. That's sort of a baseline and a floor. But the conversations that I've been having with all the other cabinet secretaries is how are we going to hold ourselves accountable? And we know that we have to have metrics. We have to be able to measure our successes. Susan Rice, the head of the Domestic Policy Council, is holding all of us accountable, which is why we're having to design these equity plans, these strategic plans that make these commitments. I can tell you at EPA, the premise of Justice 40 is 40% of that $1.3 trillion is to go in and stay in disadvantaged communities. You know, when you look at the $60 billion that EPA has, I can tell you $5 billion of those resources are cleaning up our brownfields and Superfund sites. The White House says 40% of that should go into stay-in communities. EPA stopped. The majority of that money should go to the communities that are disadvantaged and need the most. So for the first tranche of resources we put out, of those resources went to disadvantaged communities. We have the ability, we have $5 billion to electrify yellow school buses all across the country. We know that our children are disproportionately impacted and have respiratory illnesses and asthma and the like. So we should electrify these school buses in the communities that we should know. We're going to go beyond 40%. And I can assure you as an administrator that it's not just talk. We are looking and the like to structure this so that you can't roll it back.
Thank you for that question and for that commitment. One of our affiliate organizations, Moms Clean Air Force, we were really excited that our moms were able to come out and that you came out to see the kids and to ride school buses, but really show that commitment to making sure that they're in communities all over this country, regardless of their socio-demographics or their size, but that we are able to reduce pollution in a way that impacts children, impacts health, and also the economy. And I think electrification is clearly one of those opportunities. Do we have another question from our friends over here? I'm so happy to see at Black Millennials for Flint. And I'm sorry, I introduced y'all for yourself, but please go ahead and give your name and where you're from.
Latricia Adams, founder, CEO, and president of Black Millennials for Flint, and also a White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council appointee. I'm also a K-12 educator, administrator. I think it's a really... I really like the segue that you spoke about children. I'm interested in what the implications are about more integrative strategies with K through 12, particularly as it relates to green jobs. Also making the connection back to my sister from the NAACP mentioned, we want to make sure that we are actually training and building the capacity of our youth so that they can go forth into the world and actually claim these jobs, particularly for communities of color, so for our black and brown children. So really interested in what strategies or ideas you have with the implications for K through 12.
Well, you know, I can say we're going to sort of go from our, number one, Rosemary Inabakare, who is here, back here. This is my associate administrator for outreach and building capacity. Rosemary runs our educational outreach arm, right? She's been doing some amazing things in thinking about how we move our budget around so that we can focus more on K through 12 and that we can focus on our HBCUs. We need to build capacity with our HBCUs in our K through 12. I've also been spending some time with Secretary Cardona as well. You know, EPA hasn't historically had a significant resource allocation to focus on education. Since I've been in this position, we're trying to redirect resources to do that. But instead of wasting time, I'm spending more time with the Secretary of Education and trying to really get environmental education and education around climate and indoor air quality, all these things that are impacting our children, trying to develop the right partnerships to do that. So it's definitely top of mind, and it's something that we're really focused on.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Do we have time for one more? We have a question right here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Shelley Francis. I am with EV Noir. We are the only black consulting company working on e-mobility, electric, connected, shared, and autonomous mobility solutions. And thank you for speaking at our National E-Mobility Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Conference, and we want to have you back. But my question today is, one of the concerns that we have, similar to others in the room, so they talked about workforce and economic development opportunities. That's top of mind for our organization, so we started a HBCU fellowship program to create the pipeline for the next generation of professionals working in this space, as well as created a K through 12 program. But my question today is around data collection and measurement. As a public health trained professional and researcher, one of the things that we know in working to address health disparities is that you have to collect data that's specific to race, ethnicity, etc. That's how you can tell if you're decreasing the disparity. So what can you recommend, or what are you working on for us to help close the gap in terms of environmental health disparities when certain forces don't want us to utilize that specific type of data to really be able to close those gaps?
I think that's an excellent question, and what I'll say is this. There are those who say legally at EPA you can't make decisions based on race or solely based on race. The reality is that there are a number of factors that contribute to how we make decisions, and that we need to do a better job of how we weight our decision making. Let me be very clear. The data's there. Our Office of Research and Development and the office that manages science and scientific integrity, we have that information at a very granular level, whether it's water pollution or air pollution. So we have said from day one that environmental justice and equity and inclusion will be front and center of everything we do. Each of my political appointees that manage an office have come up with a plan that walks through how they make decisions based on these disparities. And it's starting to actually show influence in our policies and our regulations. So I believe that we can do a better job having partnerships with organizations that some might say are non-traditional to fact check or be sure that we have the right data. But we have the data, and I've pledged that we're going to start using that data in our decision making.
Thank you. I don't know if we have one more. If not, I am going to first thank you so much for coming and spending this time and centering this as a part of your visit We know this is Essence, and everybody is excited to be back at Essence, but to have this opportunity to spend time with you and to hear from you, I think is very meaningful, not only to everyone who's here, but also to everyone who's listening in and who's connecting with us. So thank you so deeply. And thank you to each of you for being here and for asking your questions and for being so engaged and for hopefully tagging everybody on social media so that we can continue this conversation. Thank you so much to those who sponsored this, our friends from the Climate Action Campaign, Environmental Defense Fund, Union for Concerned Scientists, NRDC, We Act for Environmental Justice. I'm hopeful I'm not missing anyone. But again, this is Essence, which is about a family effort to come together and really think through the solutions, and you have laid those out for us so well. I hope everyone has taken what the call to action is, and I will ask you to give us the last word on what you want us to do when we get up from this space and leave that can help you.
Well, thank you, number one, for creating this space to have this conversation. And I'll be just really direct. The reason that we are here, that I am here, is because this administration understands that black women are the backbone of this party. And the president is where he is because of black women. And we can't pretend that all of the solutions come from Washington, D.C. We know where the solutions come from. So we want to bring Washington, D.C. to those who have the solutions. So that's why we're here. So what I would say, when we all leave here, let's just pledge to stay connected. If there are questions that you have about our agency, please reach out. We can satisfy those questions so then you all can tell me what our partnership should look like. We can't be successful without you all. And I'll say it again, $60 billion, billion would it be, $60 billion for clean water, clean air, and cleaning up our landfills and our blighted spaces. If you all want your communities to receive their fair share, we need to hear from you. You need to hear from us. So this is a partnership, so I'm asking you all to be good partners and help us with these solutions. Thank you.